Here's something you don't see every day on YouTube, a beautiful pair of NADS. The new acoustic Dimension Electret stereo headphones NAD model RP18 is an OEM of Fostex's first planar magnetic headphone, the T50. It was also the first planar headphone released in Japan. It uses a large diaphragm with a serpentine trace, different to the spiral trace and pinched centers of the smaller Yamaha drivers in the HP1 that released the following year. These headphones both contain the Mylar version of the driver, which is a transparent, colorless plastic. The other version uses the yellow-colored and highly heat-resistant material Kapton. When I owned both versions a couple of years ago, they were even more similar as siblings than the Sennheiser HD600 and 650. I recall the Kapton had an incrementally more impressive bass performance and texture, while the Mylar had an incrementally clearer presentation of treble. Realistically, after modification or tone control, the differences will be completely moot for most people. The overall build is great. The inclusion of woven steel mesh grills is something I wish more headphone companies would do today. Many modern headphone grills are flat pieces of metal with a pattern of small perforations. Unfortunately, those types of grills are not as acoustically transparent as a woven steel mesh, which is not only more acoustically dead, but diffuses the backwave due to its non-uniform surface. I personally think woven steel also looks more impressive from its design and scores some extra style points. The pads and headband are vinyl, so they have both survived without any trouble to this day. The cable quality is good, but it's mostly one of those annoying coil types. Overall, the fundamental design language of this planar headphone has not been lost over the years, with many modern planars taking notes. The only big flaw here is the headband. It is made for children. On its full extension, it projects sound somewhere near the very tops of my ears. This should be enough to discourage most people from ever considering buying this headphone. Now, this is the part you've all been waiting for. Let's take a look at the driver. Today we're going to do something a bit different and also perform a driver disassembly. Modern planar drivers use extremely strong magnets, which is why some of them are incredibly sensitive and don't require nuclear-powered headphone amplifiers. As such, it makes them impossible to open without specialized tools that stop the magnets from shifting out of alignment and slamming back together, destroying the diaphragm in some kind of abrupt high-velocity chaos sandwich. These old planars use bar magnets that are much weaker, much more fragile, but also completely manageable by hand. To open this driver, you still do need to be careful. I apply quite a lot of downward pressure, especially while unscrewing the final screw. Then, with both hands, a lot of grip pressure and some slow, careful movements, I can open these up and take a look inside. Now you can see the Mylar RP18 driver and its serpentine trace in all its glory. Also around the diaphragm is a ring of foam which helps keep the diaphragm tense against one side, which prevents bass buzzing. Reassembly is less scary. After you've done it once and are familiar with the magnet strength and understand how robust these drivers actually are, you get some confidence in both the engineering of the driver and your ability to put it back together. Let's take a look at the other pair of NADs. This appears to be a more complete package. We have the 6.35mm adapter, a 5-pole DIN adapter, but more importantly, the original paperwork. NAD New Acoustic Dimension presents Regular Phase Stereo Headphones Model RP18. So, in case it wasn't clear before, we know what the RP stands for now. Here's the contents of the paperwork. If you like, just pause the video and have a read. The original Fostex version was released in 1974 2 years after Wharfedale produced the world's first planar magnetic or isodynamic headphone, the ID1. For context, the only other interesting headphones in that year were the piezoelectric Pioneer SE700, which had no bass, some Toshiba electrets that required both serious amplification and serious tone correction, and Beyerdynamic hadn't even released the DT100 yet, and Sennheiser was still raking in the sweet HD 414 money. Now, just look at this graph. The only real competition at this point was from Stax and Sony with their electrostatic headphones. But since those were prohibitively expensive and cumbersome for most people, I think it's fair to say that this headphone at least assisted in a turning point in audio history, since it actually cost more than a Stax SR5, but was obviously far more versatile. Overall, there are no significantly bad peaks or dips. The overall linearity is excellent. My only issue with the stock sound is the lack of energy around 10 kHz, and the bass roll-off, which actually isn't even that bad, all things considered. With a very simple tone correction, which would have been easy back in the day, as anyone using these would have plugged them into their stereo receiver amp, most of which had at least a simple bass and treble tone control. At the time these came out, these headphones were no doubt a bass revelation, at least in Japan. Personally, however, it's not for me. They don't fit my head. To call these pancake on-ear pads uncomfortable is also an understatement. So, this is what I did. It took years of trial and error, modding, sourcing new materials, research, and eventually measuring, remodding, remeasuring, rolling new earpads, and remeasuring ad nauseum to go from this to this. Firstly, the things we can't see here. Soundstage is slightly bigger as we've gone to a full-size over-ear pad. Timbre has changed a little too, since it feels more spacious and the driver is literally given more room to breathe. It sounds more natural. This is actually a symptom of the only other problem with the original headphone design. The plastic cups around the woven steel mesh were too big and cuppy, and actually add a kind of seashell effect to the sound. Personally, this mod is much closer to what I like, although I still add a little treble boost depending on the recording or my mood. Mids are a little weaker, around 1000 Hz, so a tiny mid boost can also help with that too. Overall, this mod, it's a bit dark and more lush than stock, but nothing a bit of tone correction can't fix, and even then it's not something I feel the need to fix, as comparing it with my modified Hi-Fi-Man HE500, which is my personal target for neutrality, you can see the RP18 is only a bit darker. Personally, I don't want all my headphones to sound the same, so it's nice to have something else around for when I want a super laid-back sound. As a stock vintage headphone, or a modernized modification, I still can't quite bring myself to recommend this headphone. It is historically important, does an incredible number of things really well, but modding, especially for most people, will feel like a seesaw balancing act between bass and treble. Modify for one, and you'll lose the other. So if you've got a toddler-sized noggin, and don't have a problem with on-ear pads, as long as you don't mind a bit of EQ or tone correction, it might be worth putting a pair of NADS on your head. Otherwise, I'm not sure they're worth the trouble. For more vintage headphone reviews, check out my channel and consider subscribing. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.